I'm going to show you how to set up a mesh point-to-point link using Aruba Instant Access Points. So what we have here are two instant access points that have been factory defaulted. You can tell by the way it has the set me up here, and we're at the screen where you first log in and it's asking me to put in a country code. So I'm going to select the US and I'm going to click OK. Now one thing I'll point out real quick is I have two access points. In the real world, I would use probably two 277s or 377s for point-to-point. What I'm using here in my lab is just really some indoor access points and to set this up. So when you first bring up the access points, make sure they're in the same network and they can talk to each other so they can form a cluster. Now, if you have an existing cluster, like I do, I have an existing cluster of instant access points, and they are broadcasting my corporate SSID and my guest SSID. But I do not want these access points that I'm using for the point-to-point to be broadcasting the client SSIDs for client access. So I am going to bring them up in a new VLAN, in their own VLAN, and they will form their own cluster. So some of the things I'm going to do here first is I'm going to change the name of the cluster and change the name of the access points. It's really not mandatory at all to bring up this point-to-point system, but I just like doing it. So I'm going to go in and change the name of my cluster to point-to-point. Click OK. Now this access point here, that is my virtual controller, and I can tell by the asterisk here. I'm going to go ahead and change the name to that, and I know that it is an AP 345, so I'm just going to change the name to that. My other access point down here is an AP 365. I'm going to change the name. Click OK. So none of that was mandatory. The first thing that is mandatory is go into System and do Show Advanced Options. And I'm going to scroll down to where it says Extended SSID. I'm going to change it from Enabled to Disabled to allow Mesh. And I'm going to click OK. Also, when you disable Extended SSID, it only allows for 6 SSIDs. So that was the first step. Now the second step is to set up a new SSID that is going to be used just between these two access points to form the mesh point-to-point link. So I'm going to click on New. I'm going to name my SSID Air Fiber. I'm going to click Next. Network assign. Now you want to put a pretty secure key in here. I'm not putting in a real secure key for this demo, but since you're broadcasting this between your two buildings, you probably want to put a pretty secure key in here. That'd be my recommendation. I'm going to click Next and Finish. So now I created the SSID that these two access points will speak on, and this default one should go away very soon. The next thing that I like to do is I don't really see this in directions when I read some of the directions, but I go into More and I go into Wired, and you can either use your default wired profile or you could create a new one. Now you can see my default wired profile is on port 0, and the AP365 only has this port 00 on it. Now the AP345 has 2 ports, so that'd be 00 and 0/1. So my AP365 is the access point that I will be moving over into my remote building. So I need to set that port to stay active, and I also need to set it to bridge. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in here, I'm going to edit my default profile instead of creating a new one. And the only thing I'm going to change, I'm going to go in here, I'm going to change the admin status to up. I'm going to click next. And I am going to do trunk, and my native VLAN is going to be 128. Client IP addresses are network assigned, and allowed VLANs are all. Because I'm going to have a trunk, I'm going to have 3 different VLANs in my switch across the street, and when users plug in, for example, I'm going to have VLAN 1001 here, VLAN 500 here, VLAN 1002 on port 7. So this is port 1, 3, 5, and 7. So these are going to have different VLANs. This is my uplink port. So VLAN 128 is untagged, but all my other VLANs are tagged. So VLAN 500, which is going to be on port 5, is tagged also on 1, but untagged on 5. Port 1001 is untagged on 3, but tagged on 1. And VLAN 1002 is untagged on 7, but tagged on 1. So that's how I have my switch set up. So now when we go in, my native VLAN is 128 on my trunk port. And that is all I have to set up right here. Actually, I'm going to set this port to trusted. Next, and finish. All right, so the last thing that I have to do to make this work is I need to click on my AP365. And again, my AP365 is going to be in my remote building. And it only has one Ethernet port in it. So it's port 00. I need to set that to bridge. So I can bridge and trunk all my VLANs, and they'll come across, and they'll come out over here and be able to get DHCP and things like that. So I need to be able to set this up. So just on this AP365, click Edit, and on Uplink, set bridging mode to enabled. Now, don't change this. Just leave that at 0. Before I thought, oh, I better change it to 128, and it kind of gave me some issues. So just leave that alone. Set bridging mode to enabled, and click OK. And now I'm going to reboot this AP365, and I am going to move it to my other building, and then I'm going to test by plugging into some of the different switch ports. So let me go and reboot my AP365, and after it shuts down, I'm going to unplug it, go move it to my other building, hang it up on the exterior of the building, and then we'll go inside and we'll do some testing. Okay, both my access points should be back up, so let me click OK and log back in. And they are. Both my access points are up. And this 365 is in a different building. So what I'm going to do is, I'll show you my picture here. I am going to plug into port, so the ports go 1, 2 on the bottom, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Let me expand this. Let me see if I can zoom in a little bit on that. So what I'm going to do is plug in the port 3, 5, and 7 to see if I get IP addresses in different VLANs to make sure that everything is working. So what I'm going to do is turn off my Wi-Fi. And right now I am plugged into port 3, and I can see I'm getting a IP address from VLAN 1001, so that's perfect. So next I'm going to move to port 5, And I should get a 192.168.146 address. So. Okay, so I'm plugged in now. And maybe I messed up my networks, but I did get an IP address from my other network. And I'm going to move to my last port. And I may not have that tagged correctly, so let me move back to another port for a second, and I'm going to fix that on the switch. Okay, so let me get in my switch, and I'm going to tag that last port. Oh. Plug my USB back in. So I want to put VLAN 500 untagged on port 5. Yep, port 5. Untagged on 5. And I'm going to go into VLAN 1002, and I'm going to make that untagged on 7. Okay, now let me switch back to my NIC. My wired NIC, I should say. Right now I'm plugged into port 3, and I'm getting from VLAN 1001, so that's correct. I just moved to port 5. I should get a 192.168.146 address. And I did. And now I'll move to my last port 7. And I should get something in VLAN 1002. And I did. So everything is working correctly. So that's how you set up a point-to-point. If you want to make a connection between two buildings, if your fiber went down, or you're just trying to get a connection up between two buildings, you can do it with these instant access points.